When it comes to the Vatican, the conspiracies don't stop. What else do they not want us to know? Follow me down the rabbit hole to find out. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the rabbit hole. I'm your host, Danny, and today we are talking about the Vatican again. Last time, I didn't get a chance to share all the conspiracy theories. There's just so much that goes into the Vatican and the Pope and all the different things. So this week, we're going to dive into it again. And again, I don't think I covered everything. So before we dive in, of course, I'd like to thank our sponsors. So thank you, Wise Wolf Gold, for sponsoring my podcast, guys. If you want gold and silver delivered straight to your front door for as little as $50 a month, go to rabbithole.gold right now. You can get a subscription to gold being delivered to your house. It's super easy and it's really convenient. And of course, you can watch this episode on YouTube and on Rumble. Those links are in the description. You can request an episode in the description below. And if you want to join Patreon, that's also in the description. So Patreon, you get your episodes a week early and ad-free. You get an extra bonus episode, and I'm going to be dropping new bonus episodes soon. Things are coming. Things are in the works. So run over to Patreon. It's $5 a month to join that. You get your episodes without ads, so that's worth it in itself. But let's dive in. We're going to start with the Jesuit conspiracy theories because there's several that revolve around this society within the society. Firstly, a Jesuit is a member of the Society of Jesus. They are engaged in evangelization and apostolic ministry around the world, usually working in education, research, and cultural pursuits. However, Jesuits don't always get along with the rest of the church or with secular governments. They are known for their rebellious nature, which we covered a little bit last week or 2 weeks ago in the first part. One of the earliest recorded conspiracy theories about Jesuits was in 1551. So George Brown was an Augustinian friar. Augustinians were members of several religious orders that followed the rule of St. Augustine. The order of friars lived a mixed religious life of contemplation and apostolic ministry. George Brown actually gave a speech from the pulpit to a crowd stating that there was this new fraternity that had sprung up who called themselves Jesuits. He compared them to the scribes and Pharisees in the Bible, and he said that they will try to abolish the truth and will do so by any means. They will present themselves as whoever they need to be to get whatever information they need to get. So he said, quote, "With the heathen, a heathenist, with the atheists, an atheist, with the Jews, a Jew, with the reformers, a reformade." He said this fraternity would spread all over the world and would have the ears of prominent people. These prominent people, he specifically stated like princes, would give the Jesuits all their secrets and reveal their hearts, which will happen from falling from the law of God by neglect of fulfilling the law of God and by winking at their sins. Not long after that speech, a Dominican, friars founded by St. Dominic, Melchor Cano, stated this: "God grant that it may not happen to me as is fabled of Cassandra, who was captured and burned. If the members of the society continue as they have begun, God grant that the time may not come when kings will wish to resist them, but will not have the means of doing so." As time went on, the Protestant Reformation, the English Reformation, and eventually the Age of Enlightenment brought new suspicions against the Jesuits. They were accused of infiltrating political realms and non-Catholic churches. In England, it was actually forbidden to belong to the Jesuits after a while. They were basically like the shadowy underside of the Catholic Church. And this reputation led to the suppression of the Jesuits by Pope Clement XIV in 1773. And I'm not sure when they changed the reputation and moved forward, but they obviously did because they're thought of in this new light. But that reputation of this nice society is really only surface level because there's a bunch of conspiracy theories about the Jesuits. Like, they might have had a hand in creating the Illuminati in 1776. Or did they sink the Titanic intentionally? So on April 10th, 1912, the Titanic left Southampton, England, and then it crossed the English Channel to France and then stopped for the night in Ireland. The following day, it departed from Ireland on its way to New York City. Aboard the Titanic when it left England was a 32-year-old Irish Jesuit in training, Francis Patrick Brown. He had been gifted a one-day trip on the ship by his uncle, and he boarded this ship in England and was supposed to just get off in Ireland. He did his one day. It was kind of fun, but that's all they could afford. While on board, he met a nice American couple at dinner, and this American couple, they were very well off. And they truly enjoyed Francis's company and went as far as to offer to pay for his travel the rest of the way to America and then back. Francis, thinking that this is just this great opportunity, telegraphed his superior for permission. The response he got was super shocking and concise. Get off that ship. Francis did as he was told and got off the ship. Just 3 days later, the Titanic hit an iceberg and sank. This led to the question, did the Jesuits know the Titanic was going to sink? Well, in 1910, there was a meeting of Jesuit-controlled financiers. J.P. Morgan hosted this meeting, although not everybody that attended was a banker. They're very prominent people that had a lot of money and influence in different communities around the world. The meeting included an agreement on the need to eliminate outside competition in the banking world, but they also needed to create a central bank that would be backed by the United States. Of course, there were people that opposed this idea in the world that weren't at this meeting. And in retaliation for their refusal to join this group of power brokers, they needed to be taken care of. There were 3 influential men on board the Titanic that died. Benjamin Guggenheim was an American businessman. His father ran a successful mining company, and he was left a large sum of money from his mother when she passed away. He was also married to Florette Seligman, whose father was a senior partner in J&W Seligman & Co., a prominent U.S. investment bank that was involved in the formation of Standard Oil and General Motors and backed the construction of the Panama Canal. So, a lot of influence there. John Jacob Astor IV was an American businessman, real estate developer, and investor. Astor was the richest passenger aboard the Titanic and thought to be among the richest people in the world at the time. So he built the Astoria Hotel in New York City, which was the world's most luxurious hotel, and it was adjoining the Waldorf Hotel, which was owned by his competitor and his cousin, who was one and the same. Later, this complex became known as the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, and then now it's still known as that. And lastly, Isidor Straus was a Bavarian-born American businessman and politician. He co-owned Macy's, the department store, with his brother Nathan. He served as a congressman representing New York and was the president of the Educational Alliance. He was interested in civil service reform and general extension of education. He was one of the 13 directors for Mutual Alliance Trust Company alongside William Rockefeller and Cornelius Vanderbilt. But here's the thing. So Guggenheimer and Strauss were both born from Jewish families. I couldn't verify that Astor was, but I also couldn't verify that he wasn't Jewish. And it's interesting that all 3 men have a tie to the Rockefeller Foundation or the Rockefeller family in some way. Just makes you wonder. Things that make you go, Anyway, J.P. Morgan built the ship at the Jesuits' command. They had this meeting in 1910, and they were like, okay, we need to do something to get rid of these guys. That's unsuspecting. So let's build this ship. J.P. Morgan's like, I got you. The ship, being unsinkable and beautiful with the most up-to-date finishes, attracted the businessmen. Father Francis Brown wasn't just on board as a gift from his uncle. He was actually on board to tell the captain, who was Edward Smith, who was also a Jesuit, to run the Titanic full speed through an ice field on the upcoming moonless night. After these men died, all opposition to the Federal Reserve was gone, or all opposition that had the power to do something about the Federal Reserve was gone. And the banking system was established in December 1913. Just 8 months later, the Jesuits had sufficient funding to launch a European war. We know for sure that the Catholic Church and the Vatican made significant amount of money off World War II. I don't know what their benefit was off World War I. I'm assuming probably also making money. However, their Vatican Bank wasn't established until World War II. I did not find what they were doing behind World War I. There are some thoughts, but I have a guest coming on that we're going to kind of share those thoughts back and forth about the Vatican and about them destroying ancient civilizations and trying to get rid of all kinds of things during World War I and potentially also World War II. So that's all going to come in another episode. But we do know that the Federal Reserve was established, and then the next year, World War I breaks off. So it's really convenient timing. But there are some theories that say that the Jesuits were behind the assassinations of Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy. It's said they arranged to have Abraham Lincoln killed because they wanted to undermine America's democracy. We talked about this a little bit with the Know Nothing Party and them trying to they were anti-Catholic. But as far as Kennedy, that depends on which theory you believe. Lee Harvey Oswald's cousin was a Jesuit in training when he invited Oswald to come to the House of Studies to give a lecture. The cousin extended the invitation after his parents asked him to invite Oswald there because Oswald was having a hard time getting a job after he had returned from the Soviet Union. They asked Oswald to talk about communism because he had just lived over there and he kind of knew the inner workings of the Soviet Union and what it looked like and what was happening. And he could tell them all about what life was like over there. But the Jesuits knew Oswald wasn't the smartest guy and that he didn't really have a lot to lose. They convinced him to kill President Kennedy when the time came, and I'm sure they probably had a lot of meetings with him back and forth. But eventually, Oswald's cousin left the Jesuits, about 5 years later, and it's really hard to find him and get in contact with him. Outside of the Jesuits potentially, or most likely, creating the Illuminati, they might have also had a hand in creating the Freemasons. The beginning of the Freemasons are kind of fuzzy. We don't really know all the inner workings. What we do know is the Freemasons symbol is the square and compass, but also the Eye of Providence. The Eye of Providence is also depicted as an eye inside a triangle. It's also called the all-seeing eye. This is used to represent the watchfulness of the great architect of the universe. They say that because every Mason is allowed to have whatever religion. So the watchfulness of the great architect of the universe being whatever each Mason believes in. However, it's interesting that we see this same all-seeing eye in and around many Catholic churches around the world. And then Masons are also often seen with their arms folded across their bodies, almost giving themselves a hug. And the Jesuits do it kind of across their chest, but they do the same thing. And how many conspiracy theories about the Vatican Bank or about different things that are involved with the Vatican also involve the Freemasons? It's like they've been intertwined since the very beginning. And maybe they have. I mean, the Jesuits have been around. The Catholics have been around for so long. So have the Jesuits. I mean, we've literally had a pope since Jesus died. So, I don't know. It makes you question some things, that's for sure. Was Pope John Paul I murdered? Pope John Paul I was elected as pontiff on August 26, 1978, and just 33 days later, his death was announced. For most of the world, it was hard to comprehend how this relatively healthy 65-year-old man could have suddenly died. And the conspiracies really started swirling right away. It didn't help that the Vatican's story was ever fluid. First, they stated that he was found in his bedroom by a male secretary. Then later, they admitted that the pontiff was found lifeless by the nuns who brought his coffee in the morning. They said that they didn't want that story to come out because they were worried about the perception of a female nun entering the Pope's bedroom. But there are also rumors of document mishandling in the days and weeks following his death, and the fact that he was literally only the Pope for 33 days. Eventually, they concluded that the Pope had suffered a heart attack. In the book, In God's Name, an investigation into the murder of Pope John Paul I, the author David Yallop noted that they didn't perform an autopsy. So they can determine if a person dies from a heart attack without performing an autopsy, but they rely heavily on the circumstances surrounding the death of the person. Like, did they have chest pain, or was there a history of heart disease? Was there an abnormal ECG, or other clinical signs of cardiovascular issues? Now, they said that the Pope went to bed that night complaining of chest pain. Whether that's true or not true, we'll never know, because it could just be part of this cover-up. David Yallop concluded that the Pope was most likely poisoned by plotters connected to a secret Masonic lodge with links to the Vatican and its bank. Here we go with the Masons again. Although other theories say that it was a corrupt group of archbishops that wanted him dead for financial gain. Either way, this guy's got to go. Both theories do have the Pope dying by poison. Whatever theory, they're kind of all the same, right? Whether it was the Masons that killed him or this group of archbishops, somebody wanted him dead, they killed him by poison, and it was for financial gain. Or because the Pope was going to shut down the mishandlings of the bank. Because in the years following his pontification and subsequent death, the Vatican Bank was in deep water. The scandal wouldn't come to a full head until 1982, but it's assumed that the Pope had knowledge of the corruption and tried to crack down on the officials linked to the Holy See's secretive finances. But many people were profiting off the Vatican Bank, laundering money, hiding money. We talked about this a couple of times now. We're going to get into it really deep in just a second, but money is a huge motivator for murder and for corruption. So from what I found, Pope John Paul I was kind of like a straight and narrow pope. So he wouldn't, or probably wasn't, turning a blind eye to the mishappenings in the bank and was probably going to put an end to them. And a lot of people in the church and outside of the church, the mafia, the Masons, that wasn't going to work for them. And that's why they killed him. If you want a super deep dive into God's Banker, you can go and listen to that season of Shadow Kingdom. They are not paying me for this advertisement. It's a podcast that's out. I had Niccolo on my podcast a few weeks ago to talk about God's Banker, and I've been listening to that podcast since then. We are kind of going to touch on that here, but he goes super in depth and he does a really good job. But we're going to start with the mafia. Michele Sindona was an Italian banker known as the Shark, and he worked with huge clients. He sat for meals several times with Richard Nixon before he was the president. He knew people. But he came from a poor family and was educated by the Jesuits. Imagine that. Sindona was known to have ties to the mafia. And he started by smuggling food for them when he was young, but eventually, after working as a tax lawyer for rich Italians, he caught the eye of the mafia again because he had this really good ability to avoid taxation by moving money around. And with that, he was hired by the Gambino family to handle the money they made dealing drugs. In the early 1960s, he became friends with the Archbishop Giovanni Battista Montini. Their friendship grew, and by 1963, when Giovanni became Pope Paul VI, he trusted Sindona. It wouldn't be until 1969 that Sindona would begin his association with the Vatican Bank, but he was the original God's banker. It didn't take Sindona long to figure out that the Vatican's finances were a huge mess. It was all over the place. So donations at the time were at an all-time low, and a lot of the Vatican's money was tied up in real estate artifacts, so they didn't have a lot of money on hand. Sindona was I can help you with that. He told the Pope that he didn't want to be just a financial advisor. He wanted to be moving the money. He wanted to be doing the things, and he's going to need to do it sometimes pretty fast, so he doesn't want to have to ask and get approval for every single transaction. He just wants to be able to just go in and do it. And the Pope was yeah, sure, no red flags there. And he would move huge amounts of money from the banks that he owned through the Vatican and then to Swiss banks. And of course, the only shareholder of the IOR is the Pope. And it doesn't publish any reports. They don't pay taxes. It's completely unregulated. 1969 was the same year that Roberto Calvi met Sindona. So Calvi was this nobody and he wanted to be a somebody. He wanted to be a high-end banker. But at the time, you had to know people, you had to be pretty well connected in order to be like the upper echelon of the banking industry, of really any industry, and Calvi wasn't. So he eventually made it to like general manager of a bank, but he still was just a nobody. But Sindona was a nobody that became somebody. So Calvi's like, I need to know that guy. So he sought out Sindona because he had done that. And when people talk about God's banker, they're usually referring to Roberto Calvi, not Michele Sindona. Calvi worked for a well-established Italian bank, Banco Ambrosiano. Banco Ambrosiano had started as a bank for priests and was still considered to be a Catholic bank. They were the Vatican's bank before the Vatican had its own bank. It was also one of the leading private lenders in Italy. Sindona liked Calvi and took him under his wing as like a mentee. He was like, I can really mold this guy to do what I need. And he liked that he had a position at Banco Ambrosiano. He was like, perfect, this is going to work for me. So the pair started making the Vatican a bunch of money together. But of course, they weren't just doing this out of the kindness of their hearts. They were making a ton of money on the investments they were making with the Vatican. And they were fully taking advantage of the access that they had to this bank that's completely unregulated. With his Vatican connection, Calvi's career skyrocketed. He started name-dropping the Vatican because he knew he could use their credibility. And this got him promotions at his bank, which is exactly what he wanted. He wanted to be somebody. In 1972, Sindona bought a Long Island bank and ended up getting into trouble with American banking regulators. So he was spending money from accounts that he definitely should not have been spending money from, and he needed cash to refill those accounts pretty quick. Calvi had offshore accounts, money coming in, and was working with the Vatican. So he didn't really need Sindona anymore. So he kind of just like blew the guy off. He was like, whatever. He did offer Sindona a little bit of money, but it wasn't enough for Sindona to like cover all of his debts that he needed to pay. Sindona fell deeper into trouble until he was arrested, charged with fraud, and got 25 years in prison. This is when Calvi stepped up for the Vatican and became their sole banker, God's banker. But with that, he took on some of Sindona's more dangerous clients in the mafia. Just like Sindona, Calvi was running the mafia's money through the Vatican and onto Swiss banks, just like Sindona had been doing, just like they were used to. For his podcast, God's Banker, Niccolo actually interviewed a former mafia member who talked about delivering $10 million in cash to the Vatican. Like, he landed in Italy, Vatican, like, SUVs rolled up, like black ones, loaded in all the money, and took it straight to the Vatican. Which means they knew who they were doing business with, and they just didn't care. And maybe not everybody knew. Maybe only some people knew. This same member said that Calvi had lost a lot of the mafia's money, and the mafia was pissed. But that brings us to our Freemasons' involvement. In 1981, the police raided a mattress factory in an attempt to get evidence of the mafia working with a secret organization. It wasn't about Calvi at all. At this point, they knew that Calvi was working with the mafia, but they were trying to, like, bigger fish, right? So they ended up finding information about Licio Gelli. They knew that Gelli was well connected and protected. They also found a manifesto that Gelli had written about being a fascist and wanting to return Italy to its former glory of fascism by infiltrating the government and overthrowing it. They wanted to buy up all the media outlets, destroy unions, silence journalists, take over the military, eliminate communism, like the whole 9 yards. In the safe in the factory, they found loyalty oaths to a branch of Freemasons called Propaganda 2, where Gelli was the Grand Master. These oaths stated that the members would obey the Masonic Lodge and the Grand Master being Licio Gelli. These oaths were from the country's most powerful people. You had military officers, journalists, diplomats, professors, judges, at least 30 members of Italian parliament, 2 undersecretaries, government ministers, and even a future prime minister. And mixed in with these loyalty oaths was one signed by Roberto Calvi. Propaganda 2, or P2, was or is what most people think when they think of a secret society, like hoods and smoke and mirrors, the whole 9 yards. When they had their meetings, everyone would wear hoods. Everyone, like, nobody would know anybody's identities besides Jelly, who was the Grand Master, and he sat at the head of the table. He knew, because he had these loyalty oaths, he was the only one that knew every single person that was in P2. He only used the people when he needed them. So like Roberto Calvi might not have known all the people that were in this secret organization with him. But what he did know is that P2 had fingers and everything. They had a long reach and that they could protect him. What P2 needed was for Roberto Calvi to cover their tracks with money. That's what he's good at. And in return, Calvi would get more respect and more riches, which is what he wanted. In 1982, it all came to a head. Because yes, Calvi was funneling mafia and Freemason money through Banco Ambrosiano and then the IOR, but the Vatican was also funneling covert U.S. funds to the Polish trade union Solidarity and to the Nicaraguan Contas through Banco Ambrosiano. The U.S. was using the Vatican Bank the same way the Mafia and the Freemasons were. So Banco Ambrosiano was unable to account for almost $1.3 billion. They were like, where is all this money going? And this is when Calvi fled the country and was eventually found hanging under the London Bridge of apparent suicide. Pope John Paul II pledged full transparency regarding the bank's links to the Vatican, and he then brought in, this is so funny, he brought in German financial expert Hermann Abs to help with the aftermath and the payment that they would need to give to figure all this out. Let's smooth it all out. But this move was criticized because Hermann Abs was the top banker to Nazi Germany from 1938 to 1945. But remember, the Vatican and the Nazi Party were best friends. Hitler was collecting the church tax from all the churches and gave it to the Vatican, and the Vatican was in bed with the banks or with the businesses, and they were making money off of World War II, and Hitler was funneling his money through the Vatican Bank. They were good friends. So he knew who to call because Pope John Paul II, I think he was in on it. If you want to find out who killed Calvi, whether it was the Mafia, the Freemasons, the Vatican, or all of them kind of working together, you can listen to God's Banker. He goes through all the history and why it could be this person, why it could be that person, the whole thing. I didn't want to make this whole episode about that because there are so many other conspiracies to cover. Are they covering up the Priory of Sion? So this theory comes from the book and then movie, The Da Vinci Code. Although Dan Brown, the author, claims that part of the book is not fiction, but fact, a lot of people don't believe him. So this secret European society known as the Priory of Sion is keeping one of the Vatican's biggest secrets. Or not even the Vatican's biggest secrets, just a huge secret in the world. That Jesus Christ married Mary Magdalene and had babies, and today their descendants are living in France. This could be why they didn't include the book Mary Magdalene wrote in the Bible. I don't know. They were trying to get rid of her. That's just my speculation, of course. Anyway, this theory has some evidence. So in the remote French village of Rennes-le-Château, more than 100 years ago, lived a priest, Beringer Saunier. He spent money on a scale that was way beyond his means. So he lavishly redecorated the interior of the church and he built himself this grand estate. But where the priest got his money was always this curiosity. And it's been suggested that he acquired his wealth through his association with the secret organization Priory of Sion. The clues were left in parchments they found after his death with the initials PS coming up a lot. And they were I don't know what this means. Well, Mary Magdalene supposedly brought the Holy Grail from the Last Supper to France. But what if the Holy Grail that everyone assumes is what Jesus drank from at the Last Supper was really their child? Which might be why the Holy Grail has never been found. Because it wasn't actually this Holy Grail. It was just this baby. I don't know how old the kid was. The Priory of Sion was supposed to help restore the virtues of Christianity, but have been suppressed by the Vatican. They were going to benevolently conquer Europe by placing a royal bloodline on thrones across the continent. And this is another place in which we see the Vatican doing the devil's work and not God's. And we see this throughout Catholicism. And I'll tie in more the Vatican's working for the devil in just a second, but go on this journey with me for a minute. Many ancient civilizations believed in many gods, not just one god. This is called polytheism. They are pagan religions. These pagan religions would sacrifice to their gods, and the gods would only talk to their high priests. In these cultures, you would often see kind of like the same group of gods over and over in each culture. So you'd have one man who was like a sun god or like father god, one woman who's a virgin or mother god, and then the son of the mother who was the son of God. One of Noah's great-grandsons was named Nimrod. He was very strong and defeated both man and beast. He was like this really like great warrior. Nimrod's father, Cush, was the leader of Babylon when they were building the Tower of Babel to ascend to heaven. And then God came down and was like, you guys can't talk anymore. Like, stop talking to each other. And he confused their language. So Nimrod wanted to continue his father's work by like turning away from God, like kind of doing their own thing. He's like, I like that. Let's keep doing that. Which, whatever. He's kind of like the god of the occult. He was definitely following Satan. So he communicated with the spirits, which allowed him to complete great accomplishments. He started the first world government, and everyone under him practiced the same religion. And they worshipped him as a god on earth. Eventually, he was killed by God's followers, and they cut him up into pieces and sent a piece of him to every city that worshipped him to prove that he wasn't a god, and that those cities should turn back to God. Well, Nimrod had married his mother. Yeah, yes, you heard that right. So she liked the power she had when she was married to Cush, and when Cush fell, she wanted to stay in power. So she married her son, Nimrod, because he was like raising up in power. But when he died, she needed a way to stay in power, so she got pregnant and told the followers that the baby was the spirit of Nimrod. She had claimed she was having a virgin birth because she had slept with no man to get pregnant with this baby, although she's definitely had a baby before because she had Nimrod. She convinced her followers, or the followers, that her son was the fulfillment of God's prophecy of Jesus, and Nimrod was said to have gone to the sun, and the sun rays are what got her pregnant. And now they needed to worship the sun god, who was named Baal, which was Nimrod. He changed his name to Baal, which happens a lot in the Bible. Lots of name changing. So Semiramis said she was the moon god, sometimes also called Madonna or the Queen of Babylon. She was now named Ishtar. Ishtar said she came down from the moon in a moon egg, Ishtar's egg, eventually Easter egg, like a pagan holiday. And their son was named Tammuz. He was born on the winter solstice, and he died by being attacked by a boar and ascended to be with Baal in the sun. So he was the sun god reborn. Based on Nimrod's story, many religions came about. So those of Babylon, Egypt, Persia, Greece, and Rome. And then we also see it with Catholicism, where you'll see like a male god and like a female god and their son. In Catholicism, we see this with God, the Virgin Mary, and Jesus because of the way that they almost worship the Virgin Mary in Catholicism. Granted, that's not a smoking gun. That's not like, okay, they're worshiping the devil because they have this pagan-ish thing going on. That's not the only thing. They are giving themselves away with symbolism so much. Like, it's like, guys, come on. Like the mitre that the Pope wears, sometimes referred to as the papal tiara. So we talked about the mitre during the COVID part of the first episode, but there's more to this. So the mitre is this tall, pointed hat with two peaks rising upward from the front and the back, forming a sort of narrow oval or like almond shape when viewed from the side. It typically stands upright on the Pope's head and comes to a gentle peak at the top. And it kind of almost like resembles a flame or like a folded fan. The sides are stiff and slightly curved outward, and it's often elaborately decorated with gold embroidery, religious symbols, and fine fabric. At the back, two long ribbon-like strips called lappets hang down, usually draping over the shoulders of the Pope. This mitre looks very similar to that of the priests that worshipped the fish god Dagon. They are often depicted wearing a fish head. Like they cut the fish open like on its neck and they put the head on their head. So the fish's mouth is open and it's got like a peak at the front and a peak at the back. I'm going to include a picture. So if you're not watching this, you can look up a picture or you can just like take my description as it is. But if you are watching this, I'm going to include a picture. And then you have the rest of this fish, like, you know, they cut it open at the neck. You got the mouth open upwards. The rest of the fish is draping down the priest's back. Very similar to what this mitre is doing on the Pope's head. Dagon is a pagan god. The Pope and others that work in the Catholic Church have been seen wearing the cross pate. This cross is usually red in color. The arms are narrow in the center of the cross and flare in like a curve or sometimes a straight line to the broader ends of the arms. Sometimes there's like a circle in the middle of the cross, not always. So this cross has also been called the Templar cross, you know, from that secret organization that doesn't exist anymore, the Knights Templar. Which, like, how many secret organizations are involved with the Vatican? All of them? Well, okay, so this same cross is seen on a carving of the ancient Mesopotamian sun god, Shamash. The Pope is seen wearing this cross on his amice. And if you look from an aerial view, you can see the same cross in the courtyard of St. Peter Basilica. Like, if you're looking down on this, it creates this cross, which happens a lot. Like, the Freemasons have done this in Washington, D.C. So if you look at aerial views of Washington, D.C., you can see like the way the roads are shaped, like creates an owl or creates like different triangles. It's really neat. I'm going to have to do a whole episode on it. It's kind of neat the way they did it, but also you're like, definitely makes you think about like the secret organizations running the country or the world. Anyway, that's not for here. So on Pope Francis' coat of arms, it has the letters IHS with a cross kind of like going through it. And he would also wear this symbol sometimes like on his chest. When you look up why the Pope would wear these letters, they say it represents the name Jesus in the Greek alphabet if you capitalize all of it. Like all of it's capitalized in the Greek alphabet, it spells out Jesus. Not IHS. There's a couple more letters in there, but that's why they say they wear it. But others say that the Jesuits wear IHS to represent Isis, Horus, and Seth, the Egyptian Trinity, which is another way that they're showing us who they are truly worshiping, and it's not God. It's the devil, because the devil is actually in charge of all the trinities from all the other religions. And that brings us to the pine cones. Pine cones are super fascinating, by the way. So conifer trees, they are older than flowers. Pine cones, they're like one of the oldest trees out there. Pine cones are kind of like what flowers were before we had flowers, right? Because they pollinate and they open up and they're beautiful. And what's cool is that the pine cone spines spiral in a perfect Fibonacci sequence in both directions. Pine cones are associated with the pineal gland, and the pineal gland is this tiny gland in the bottom of our brains that is part of our endocrine system. It secretes the hormone melatonin, and its main job is to support the body's circadian rhythm. It receives more blood flow than any other organs besides the kidneys, and it's also the only part of the brain that doesn't have a left and right hemisphere. It's just what it is. It's often considered the biological third eye or the seat of the soul, the epicenter of enlightenment. Because of its association with the third eye, many cultures have included it in their symbolism, like the staff of Osiris in ancient Egypt, which depicts two intertwining serpents rising to meet a pine cone. And this staff is actually echoed in Indian culture with the Kundalini, which is a spiritual energy in the body described as coiled serpents rising from the spine to the third eye in the moment of enlightenment. In their culture, awakened Kundalini is when all your chakras are aligned and is the only way to achieve divine wisdom. It's said to bring pure joy, knowledge, and love. The Hindu deity depictions often have symbols of serpents and pine cones with them. Like all the different deities have serpents and pine cones. Hindu gods are often drawn or sculpted holding a pine cone in their outstretched hand. Ancient Assyrian palace carvings show their gods holding pine cones, often using a pine cone to pollinate their depiction of the tree of life. And Greeks and Romans also had staffs with pine cones on them. At the Vatican, they have a 3-story tall pine cone statue called Pigna. This was given to them by the Romans, and it sits in the court of the pine cone. A pine cone is also on the staff carried by the Pope, which is very similar to the staff of Osiris or the staff seen in Greek and Roman mythologies as well, which we know all 3 of those are pagan religions. So is the Catholic Church a pagan religion? The Holy See coat of arms features 3 crowns stacked on top of each other with like a small cross at the top, and it looks an awful lot like a pine cone. In fact, many people believe that the term Holy See directly refers to the third eye. And pine cones are also on a variety of illumination sources throughout the Vatican, such as lamp holders and candle holders and different things like that. There are so many symbols, and we know that the Catholic Church is huge on symbolism that suggests they're not worshiping God. Plus, the Latin root for Vatican is kind of suspicious. So vatis means sorcerer or diviner, and cans means snake or serpent in Latin. And we know that they have always spoke Latin in all their masses. So isn't it weird that they would name themselves like a divine or like a sorcerer serpent or a serpent sorcerer? That's odd because both of those things are not in the Bible. In fact, they're like evil things. They're things that turn you away from the Bible. One would say that they are things of the devil. But with that, we have come to the end of the Vatican Part 2. And I know I still have not yet covered every single conspiracy theory about the Vatican and the Pope and the Catholic Church. So I need you guys to let me know if you want me to do a part 3 and bring even more information to you all. I know typically like 2-parters aren't always like that exciting. Sometimes people don't like 2-parters, but I'll do a part 3. If that's what you guys want, I'll do it. So let me know. And until next week, my friends, stay skeptical, and I will see you all then. Hey friends, The Rabbit Hole is an independent podcast with everything you hear done by me, Danny Mercy. I appreciate all of your support. Please rate and review wherever you're listening. If you want to follow us on Instagram, it's at rabbit.holepodcast. And thank you, Zakar Balaha, for our awesome intro.